Welcome to Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions, the podcast where real life meets big dreams. I'm Johanna, your host, and every episode will dive into inspiring stories from PAs, doctors, and professionals who are also dreamers and mission-driven changemakers. From the hospital halls to the hearts of our homes, and even into communities across the world, we'll laugh, learn, and uncover the challenges, triumphs, and everything in between as we see life through each other's perspectives. Looking for more joy and balance in your career? Don't miss our free guide, How to Be a Fulfilled Clinician, your quick boost of encouragement with tips to help you thrive while juggling all your hats you wear. And if you've got little dreamers at home, check out Little Evie's Big Dreams on Amazon. These stories are meant to spark imagination, courage, and kindness, perfect for bedtime or anytime. Follow along as Evie, a little Sri Lankan girl, brings joy and creativity to her community while daring to dream big. This podcast is also brought to you with love by the Ephraim Foundation International, because empowering children and families in rural Sri Lanka isn't just charity, it's continuing a legacy of hope and creating futures full of possibilities. So grab your cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and get ready for uplifting conversations that will leave you inspired and equipped to make a greater impact. Let's jump in. Welcome back to Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. I'm your host, Johanna Moses, and today's conversation is one that asks us to look deeper, not only at women's health, but at the stories our culture tells women about suffering, strength, and worth. Joining me again is Kayla Branstetter, English instructor, writer, TEDx speaker, researcher, and author of an upcoming book, Don't Be an Athena. In this episode, we explore a different side of the Athena metaphor. Beyond the idea of mean girl culture, we ask harder questions. What happens when systems protect power more than people? What happens when women who experience pain are expected to stay quiet? And what happens when vulnerability becomes something society fears instead of protects? Through conversations on reproductive health, narrative medicine, trauma, motherhood, identity, and cultural expectations, Kayla invites us to consider how women who are often praised for endurance while being given little room for humanity. We also discuss the ancient story of Medusa, not as mythology for mythology's sake, but as a lens for understanding how people who experience suffering can sometimes become misunderstood, isolated, or defined by what happened to them. This episode is not about rejecting strength. It's about asking whether true strength makes room for truth, compassion, and care. Now let's get into part 2 of my conversation with Kayla Branstetter. Thank you again, Kayla, for coming on the show. I'm really interested in this conversation and, having a 2-part conversation with you on the podcast, because I do feel that the topics you touch on are very important and very apropos for the current situation that we all experience here today in the U.S. and I think globally. So thank you so much for coming on again. I appreciate your time. So tell me your title. I know we touched on a variety of topics last time, but I wanted to talk more about the book specifically and what this whole concept of Athena is. And your title, it's Don't Be an Athena. Sometimes when I read the, intro and few excerpts of your book, it goes deeper than sometimes we think of a mean girl culture. And you've spoken about Athena as a symbol of systems that preserve power rather than protect the vulnerable. What does that Athena imagery represent to you?
It represents, I think, if we look at the goddess Athena, she's complicated. She's not perfect. And I think that we can respect her and at the same time be critical of her for that. The duality of her character. So her own beginning is she was formed out of Zeus's head, and she has a complicated relationship with her father in that, depending on, I guess, which perspective you're seeing, that some people felt like she was Zeus's favorite daughter, but she kind of felt like she never measured up. And I think as women, especially if you have a father that is as powerful as Zeus, of just always being in that shadow and being the daughter of such a powerful patriarchal figure. And Zeus himself is complicated. And Zeus has raped many mortals. And I think that rape culture is just intertwined in the Greek gods and goddesses. So Athena, she's known for her wisdom. In fact, we have a city named after her, Athens, Greece. So in Greek mythology, she is a goddess that is held in high regard and well respected. But like I said previously, she's flawed. And so when it comes to don't be an Athena, it means like when you become this powerful woman, whether it's money or if you're in a powerful position, how are you going to utilize that position? And Athena, we can be critical of her decision to Medusa because Medusa was a mortal woman. She was just a mortal girl. She was the only mortal sister of the Gorgons who vowed to become a priestess to the goddess of Athena as long as she remained a virgin. And she was willing to do that. She captured Poseidon's attention, which is Zeus's brother, and Poseidon, and I'm going off of the Roman poet Ovid's interpretation of Medusa, and that Poseidon sexually assaults Medusa in Athena's holy temple. And Athena has a decision to make, and she feels like she can't really go after Poseidon, who's more of her equal. We're dealing with two powerful people, Poseidon and Athena. They're immortal. They have a lot of power, and it was these powerful entities that violated Medusa. Medusa didn't do anything wrong. And so Athena turns Medusa into this monster that we know of her today. Snakes for hair, the ability to turn men into stone. And I think that there's an interesting perspective on her decision to do this. There's one is she enacts her anger and rage onto Medusa by turning her into this Gorgon, removing her of her beauty. And as a result, there are more victims because anytime Medusa looks a man in the eye, he becomes a stone. And so we have this this generational curse of her having more victims because Athena decided to turn Medusa into this monster, into a victim, instead of empowering her to become a survivor and breaking the cycle of victimization. Or we can look at it as, and I'm a mother, and how often have we mothers, our children do something, and out of almost shame and regret of our inability to be able to protect them, we overreact, like we overprotect our children. And you can look at Athena's decision to do that. She turned Medusa into this Gorgon as a form of protection that no man can ever violate her again. But what's interesting is Athena also provides the proper tools to Perseus to defeat Medusa, to behead her. And after Perseus beheads Medusa, she gives birth to Poseidon's twins. And Athena uses the head of Medusa as a shield. She hides behind her. So she becomes like this form of protection. And I just took that as an extended metaphor to the 21st century. And in some regards, I took it literally because how often when we have victims of sexual assault, do we turn them into monsters? We continue to victimize. What were you wearing? Were you drinking? And especially if the woman is violated by a man of power, like we instantly turn her into a monster, like it almost justifying what happened to her instead of empowering her and saying this never should have happened. But this book isn't just about sexual assault. It is about women in general on reproduction, of how often do we turn women into Medusas, shaming them maybe over something that's completely out of their control, instead of providing them with the proper resources to thrive and to overcome whatever tragedies and traumas they are enduring.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you came up with this or thought of using this mythological power play of characters into something that is happening in our culture today. Because you're very right, we do shame women, even if it's not their fault. And that I was actually writing a series on colonialization and various aspects that has affected, culture. And it seems to be very relevant to maybe modern day as well, not just, several decades ago in different colonized countries, because I feel like sometimes those, as you're pointing out, is those power plays of people don't allow the people that they're like, for instance, the colonizations, like people who colonized other countries, they, had a cultural erasure and just like overthrew, the natural underlying ecosystems that were going on in those different countries. And in the same way, I feel like you can bring it into modern day society. And what you're saying is, for women, we have this internalized misogyny that can be because of all these different ideologies that have kind of pervaded through history and through our culture to show that women are subservient and less than, not enough. And, all of these things kind of rack up upon each other, and it becomes part of our belief system. And sometimes, even when you think of major lawsuits going on or legal issues going on, a woman's voice and say of this man did something bad to me is not enough, right? And they have to, they, don't believe, they want to prove why her voice matters versus believing her voice automatically, right?
Absolutely. And it's almost when something so tragic happens to a woman, it's her entire character seems to be on trial instead of just the action itself. And I love that you brought up the colonizing and in the time of when the world was colonizing, because I feel like there was this power dynamic of the people in power feeling entitled to distribute so much pain and suffering to people that weren't like them, and how that, and like you said, and how that continues to find itself, that myth continues to find itself in 21st century medicine and even in the United States. And especially when it comes to Black women and Black mothers and their pain being dismissed, and how that is tied to colonialism still.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And even just, when we're talking about just the belief systems that have kind of been something that we have become okay with and normalized, even though it has been based on, kind of demeaning or looking down or taking away the rights of people. And we have normalized certain aspects of those things and allowed it to kind of seep through our belief systems, and which is why we end up with some of these current situations and disparities that we see in healthcare or just society in general, wealth distribution, and coming down to the point of even something just as obvious as, men taking advantage of women and women being helpless and victimized because of it, and victimized even if they speak up because they're put to shame and they're not empowered to be like, this was something that happened to you and we need to fix the problem instead of shaming the person.
And I think it goes back to what we discussed the last time. It goes back to education and educating women of their bodies and their rights, and no means no, because I've had to report sexual assault cases when I taught high school, and my teenage girls didn't know that they had been raped, had no idea that they had been raped, because they didn't understand that manipulation is still a form of rape. And if you said no at any time, no means no. You may have agreed to go on a date, but that didn't mean you agreed to being raped. And I understand, because the consequences of some of these young women coming forward, and if we're looking at it even at the national level of more famous cases of how we treat women who come forward, they were called names, whore, slut, that they deserved it. What were you wearing? Why did you go on a date when you knew about their past? And just so much negativity. And it's almost like we're justifying the perpetrator's behavior and ignoring what happened to the woman, to the victim. And I feel like we do that even in reproduction and even in the healthcare. We find a way to justify treating a human being the way that sometimes society treats them.
Yeah. And it's interesting, though, that you chose Medusa, because she ends up becoming this monster. How do you explain that that aspect of her becoming a monster when you compare it to, modern day society and cultural expectations and issues that are rampant.
I feel like everybody has a story, everybody, and we don't, whether we agree or disagree with somebody, there's a story behind that person's actions. And I grew up, and when I grew up knowing about Medusa, she was always the villain. I remember watching Hercules back with the interesting 1990s, special effects. And and if you think back to when I was a young girl, you were rooting for Hercules to defeat Medusa. You were rooting for this, the hero, the man to save the day and to protect society from this villainous woman who is such a threat. But when you take a step back and you actually look at her story, is she really the monster? And I remember feeling when I was going through infertility and a miscarriage, I felt like the monster because I was being judged for not following a specific narrative that tradition had, laid out for me. And I think in some degree, if you don't follow this specific narrative, how easy it is that you become the main character. You're doing everything correctly to now you are the antagonist. You are the villain in this narrative. And I wanted to provide a platform for women to take control over their stories of their narratives, because we're still talking about Medusa and Athena thousands of years later. We're not really changing much as society. And I feel I'm at this point, like, when will it be enough? When are we going to be done? This is thousands of years in the making of turning women into these monsters for no reason. When are we going to have enough and finally realize there is a human being behind that trauma? And when we start recognizing and providing resources for, and not just women, people as a whole, start providing resources, one, understand their story. And once we can understand the story, then I think we can start providing the proper resources to help the healing, and not just physical healing, but I think your emotional healing is just as important as the physical healing. And they both correlate. They both go together.
Yeah, it's really sad when you think about it, when women are, going through grief, infertility, postpartum depression, chronic pain from fibromyalgia, or other, chronic issues, or even, just victimization. It is very interesting that we haven't yet understood, although I think now enough women are speaking up, that it is becoming something that we're identifying better, or at least trying to find the words and protocols to help better, at least with medicine and health. Trying to, but I know that it is a long journey, because even when I was studying medicine, fibromyalgia, just as an example, it was so not well understood that a lot of women do get dismissed to just put on a bunch of different pain medicines without any real understanding of what they are actually going through. And I kind of saw that in some of my clinical rotations, just kind of seeing what women were facing. And I didn't quite understand it at the time, but now I can really reflect back and see, like, that really was a dismissal of their pain and what they were going through at that time,
It reminds me of, speaking of the 80s and 90s, one of my favorite shows is The Golden Girls. And there's an episode where Dorothy has this chronic fatigue. And she is going to doctor after doctor, and they are saying, well, there's nothing wrong with you. They're taking her blood work, and Dorothy's like, I'm telling you, something doesn't feel right. She has this chronic fatigue, and I think she goes all the way to New York, which is where her character originally is from. And finally, a doctor is saying, no, you're not going crazy. I believe you. And I remember this character, she was just like so relieved that finally a doctor wasn't just dismissing her chronic fatigue. And that was a storyline from the late 80s. Of the Golden Girls, and how we are still continuing to see that just last week. So my mom went to urgent care last week. My mom kept complaining about like vertigo. Her ear wasn't feeling right. She just she's like, I don't feel good. She goes to the local urgent care. She calls me and she's furious. She spent less than 6 minutes total from like checking in, having the PA come in and being checked out. And she goes, I think I have an inner ear infection. He looked on the outer part and goes, oh, you don't, you're fine. Go to the ER. I think you need a brain scan. And she's just sitting here like, what? Like, I'm not going to the ER. It's expensive. I truly think I just need
Uh-huh.
antibiotics. And she was upset because he felt so apathetic about the fact that she's coming in, she's explaining her symptoms. He didn't seem like he wanted to deal with it. And he was going to make her the emergency rooms department when should she really be going to the ER for these type of symptoms and taking a place of an individual who has a more severe condition? Probably not. And not only that, the ER is insanely expensive. So she goes to a regular practitioner. He looks in her ear, looks in the inner ear, and she has an ear infection and she received her antibiotics. But going
Oh
to
my
urgent
goodness.
care over the weekend, she was furious that the
Yeah.
PA had dismissed her pain and was willing to make her someone else's problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And she probably still had to pay for that visit too.
Yes, it was like $60. She goes, it was like
Oh
$60 for
gosh.
less than 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And
That's really poor treatment. And yeah, it's a really, really sad thing, but that's happens, right? I
Mhm.
mean, people do get dismissed, maybe from the just lack of care, too busy, whatever the excuse may be, but that's just not an excuse to a worthwhile, like no matter what the excuse is, it's not worthwhile to
No, and
dismiss
it's
someone. Yeah.
not worth, in my opinion, to even make her
Mhm,
another provider's decision and to put a
mhm,
patient financially in burden over something as simple as
mhm.
an ear infection. 'Cause, an ER
Yeah.
visit, that would be like a twelve to
Yeah.
$1,500
Thousands.
visit for antibiotics.
Yeah. Yeah. My goodness. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's why a lot of people are kind of frustrated with the healthcare system today. And there's so many, issues with that. And I don't, I don't see how we're improving. And I think, to be honest, even with everything going on nationally, it's even more of going to be an even more difficult issue to solve and going to take a lot more years of regaining trust. Because I think when it comes down to it, the trust between patients
Mhm.
and physicians and practitioners has been broken. And it may have been from just misunderstanding science to the lack of care to the built up systems that are just very improperly enforced. But there's so many factors, but ultimately that
Mhm.
trust is broken and it's a multifactorial project to rebuild it politically,
Absolutely.
emotionally, healthcare, in every single way.
I
But,
wish we could have
yeah.
like universal health care. Like it should not, I feel like healthcare should be a basic human right. Nobody should
It is.
be denied antibiotics for strep throat. I feel like
Mhm,
nobody should feel like they're going to be punished for taking off work to take care of their physical health. And I think those are real conversations. And like you said, we need to have these conversations from like the top to the bottom of it begins with policy change. It begins with talking about how much control insurance companies are allowed to have, how much control pharmaceutical companies are allowed to have, and
mhm,
getting back to the humanity of medicine, which is why I love narrative medicine. And I'm working on trying to get a narrative medicine certificate started at my institution. But I'm also not naive. Narrative medicine it's about patient advocacy, but it's also about reducing burnout for healthcare providers. I
mhm,
have 7 students right now in high school in my upper bound class. I teach college, but I have high school students this semester or this summer, and they all want to go
mhm,
into healthcare. And we're talking about like coping strategies of how to handle grief and how to handle a
mhm,
system that doesn't work for you as a provider. You know what you need to do, but it's not working for you, and
yeah.
how to like overcome some of these obstacles. And I know that that doesn't fix the system. It doesn't fix
Mhm,
the bureaucratic issues of the field,
mhm,
but it's a start at least when a patient comes in, like my mom, it's like, hey, I think I have this. Just take the extra 30 seconds to look in the inner ear. You know,
mhm.
that
Yeah.
that's not a bureaucratic problem. That is
Mhm.
an individual.
That's an individual problem for, that provider or
Hmm.
practitioner or physician, whatever they want to be called, you know? And that's a very poor way of caring for an individual that, but I don't know what leads to that, but, or actually I'm sure, as you said, there's a lot of things that lead to that with burnout and just, just tired, the
Mm-hmm.
overwork and etc., which is another aspect and issue of the healthcare industry that is burning out. I know I was just talking to a person I recently met. The daughter is interested in medicine. The mom is like, actually, I've been trying to convince her that maybe there might be a different aspect of, medicine that you can go into or field you can go into, because healthcare is not what it used to be. And so that was interesting. That's kind of the dilemma now, and that we're facing for a lot of people too.
My own
But
sister
yeah,
did
and
that.
then,
My own
oh
sister
yeah,
was
you
a
were saying,
talented pre-med
yeah,
student.
hmm,
She was getting ready to take her MCAT. I mean,
hmm,
talented. I mean, she had presented across the country at healthcare conferences,
hmm,
and talented, just a promising future provider. She spent 2 years as getting her experience before applying to medical school, and she was done.
yeah,
She got burnt out after 2 years, and it wasn't working with the doctors. It was she was tired of insurance dictating the treatment plans.
yeah, yeah. I know. Just today, I had to call insurance for a peer-to-peer to like prove that someone needs continued care in post rehab setting. And so that's what we have to deal with. It's crazy. And then I just the other day, I actually, just to bring this in because it kind of goes along with this talk we're talking about right now, but I saw that some of the researchers, for federally funded grants, they're going to change it so that they have more of a political control over the research and funding that PhD scientists and universities will be
Mm-hmm.
receiving. So much so that PhD, or, people with a PhD who have studied and, gone through rigorous training, they are experts in the minutia that they know. They know everything about that particular topic that they are studying, about cancer and research and whatever, they may be studying. And this is discussing cancer research because it was affecting the NIH and different federal fundings that come through that. And it's going to be based on a political appointee determining whether grants are funded or not, where it used to be a peer-reviewed process where peers, all together, people who have the
Yeah,
scientific background, who have the knowledge, the understanding, the,
and a
you know,
rigorous IRB
knowledge.
program.
Exactly. And then by that, they know which ones can go through. And of course, it's a competitive field. So, but they do choose on those, years, which research project gets funded based on knowledge of the expert scientific panel, peers who understand the processes and understand the needs that will go into actually, funding this project, right? But now it's going to be a political appointee, which will mean that likely it's going to be based on whatever popular culture is dictating, or based on what certain biases for certain political parties are going to be dictating. And it's not going to be scientifically informed anymore. And it's going to be more just a popularity, pop culture, or, just political biases in science, funding, cancer research, healthcare, treatments, protocols, affecting most of our, future research and science efforts, and which will make it very difficult for the current professors in various fields of research. It's I don't, and it comes down to what you're talking about, is that power play that people are, victimizing basically us.
Yes, yes, you have these larger entities, Poseidons and the Athenas, and
Mhm.
we are the Medusas right now.
Yeah,
Because I mean, science and research should not be political.
exactly.
Women's reproductive health should not be political. There should be nothing political about
Mhm.
it. And I teach research to freshmen
Mhm.
and college freshmen, college sophomores, and I teach, fallacies and critical thinking. And one of the first lessons I teach them is facts are facts, whether you like them or not. And you may not like the research because it doesn't align with your political belief or your personal belief, but facts are facts. And you have to remove your personal and your political belief because at the end of the day, it's humanity that's at risk, not your hubris.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, because, even when, I've talked with other people in the medical research, and it's all about, what we're doing to help others, but based on a scientific process, right? And there is a research going into things for a reason, and there is a scientific process there for a reason that, that is how they end up with different various protocols, different treatments, etc., or ideas and knowledge that helps medical, healthcare, engineering, science, etc. And, there's people in every field, PhD researchers, scientists, healthcare practitioners, or providers or physicians who may be from whatever political spectrum, but they don't base their treatments, or they shouldn't, based on political ideologies. They base it on science and research. But why are we changing things to be based on political ideologies, And I feel that that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I feel that touches on that aspect, because I feel we're becoming.
Yeah, and it just puts so many people at risk. And like you said, cancer, it goes back to this, when they were doing research on hormones in mice, like the transgenic mice, and they thought that they were doing like transgender studies. And I don't know if they truly understand the importance that hormones play. I remember my friend, her dad had brain cancer or a brain tumor. They had removed the tumor, and he had to take extra hormones because just that one surgery, he had to take testosterone because of it affects so much. And we do need to be doing research on hormones because hormones play such a role in our health. But when you're weaponizing academic jargon or science jargon to fit a specific narrative, did they even read the study? Did they even read that this was probably an IRB approved, peer reviewed study for cancer patients?
Yeah, exactly. Because they pick and choose what they want to study. I mean, even in talking about just historically, which we kind of talked about last time. And I don't know whether you touch in your book, but, just with Black populations and how they were abused and used for science and research, healthcare, medicine, but that ended up creating a loss of trust with those communities with healthcare and medicine as well. And if we further politicize things, then we're going to further lose that trust, which is what has already happened today.
I actually addressed that in the first lesson of my narrative medicine course this summer. Like I said, I have high school students who are interested in having a career in healthcare. We talk about certain diseases. I don't talk about the science behind the disease. We talk about the patient behind the diseases. And so we read an article. It was published, the writer, her name was Jade. I forgot her last name, but this essay was published in the Brown Journal of Medical Humanities, the 2026 edition. And she talks about sickle cell and how one of the treatments of sickle cell is blood transfusions and having bone marrow donations. And the Black community is hesitant on donating blood and bone marrow, despite the fact that that is what's desperately needed as a form of treatment for sickle cell. So she was reaching out to the Black community and trying to build that trust again to help the individuals who are suffering from sickle cell. And she goes into why there's this distrust. And she talks about syphilis on when the U.S. government knowingly administered syphilis to 400 Black men and refused to treat them after they had administered the disease, followed by Henrietta Lacks, who her cervical cells had been removed and was used to develop like the polio vaccine, IVF, advancement in cancer, which was all great, but it was done without her consent. And it took her family, 72 years to basically receive recognition and to receive an apology. So my high school students said they had no idea. That's not in their history books. And I had one girl, she said that she attended a Christian school in middle school, and one of her classmates was from the Black community. And I guess they engaged in a conversation that she was not vaccinated. And my student, it was like this epiphany of finally, like, she was connecting the dots. She goes, I remember this girl in my class that wasn't vaccinated, and she was from the Black community. Because now that I read this essay, she goes, I understand. And this is a future, like, pediatric healthcare. And I said, okay, so now that you understand the history, and it just gave her perspective, and she was a little angry that she's never heard this before. I said, okay, you're going into pediatrics. If you have a family specifically from that community, and they're showing some hesitancy on vaccinating their children, you, the provider, are now in a much better position to understand where they're coming from. And that's going to make you a more well-rounded practitioner. But we need to have those honest conversations, and it cannot be politicized.
Yeah, it makes me think of this NPR segment I was listening to a week or so ago. They were talking about in Michigan, they had a program that they wanted people who chose not to vaccinate their kids to come to the health department, receive a lecture on understanding the importance of vaccinations. But it got so much backlash. And so many hate-filled conversations and voicemails were left on the health department's mailbox that they had to actually cancel it because they tried to, go to the communities that did not want to vaccinate their kids and have them listen to why there was a need for vaccination. But there was a disconnect there, where the people who did not want to vaccinate were not understanding why the need for vaccination, but then also maybe the health department was also realizing they couldn't figure out a better way to connect with those patients and populations either. They tried to understand why they didn't want to vaccinate, but the way they were trying to do it, still, even with just trying to come to each individual person and have them understand, that it was just that disconnect there. And you talk about understanding, but it goes both ways. And it's very difficult if, whether or not, both parties try to understand each other, but people are so set in their belief systems that they refuse to want to understand or make the reparations, so to speak.
I mean, I know people were starting to question vaccinations before COVID. We started seeing a slight decline, but I think the marketing of the COVID vaccine just severed, I think, that trust, because, and I don't have facts to back this up, but I just felt like the marketing of how it was presented. And I think there was a lot of misinformation about the COVID vaccine. And I think people were afraid that this vaccine was created so quickly, not realizing the mRNA vaccine had been established for decades. Of course, it was going to be done quickly. But I remember talking, because I'm in a rural area, folk medicine is still ingrained in a lot of people's beliefs. And I remember encountering a person and, like, my mind was blown. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the problem. And I remember she said, she goes, well, we need to do what we did with chickenpox when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we heard Johnny down the road got chickenpox. We took all of our kids and we went to go see Johnny to get exposed, and we get the chickenpox and we were fine. We just need to do the same thing with COVID. And chickenpox and COVID are not even remotely the same, but that's their belief, is that herd immunity is a much better option over vaccination. And and you're correct in, if the health department is going to take initiative and educate people on the importance of vaccinations and try to see the different perspectives, it's a two-way street. And the community and the public also need to kind of let their walls down and be receptive to the information and understand, just like the public health risk of not vaccinating our children or not getting our own vaccinations. But in communities, marginalized communities and rural communities, I think that's a tough objective to me, and it's getting harder and harder because it's becoming more and more political when it should not become political.
Yeah. And the misinformation, disinformation effect is massive right now with a lot of things, and especially healthcare and medicine is being attacked or crumbling because of misinformation, disinformation. Because we're seeing just so many different popping up because of that.
Measles.
Not just in vaccines, but yeah.
Measles. And that was preventable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even with cancer treatments, I mean, people are so, just listening to wellness or influencers or other things that they, just build up this whole idea that they can do this thing and it'll be okay when it may not, And so just a lot of a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there that is causing a lot of difficulties in getting the actual science. And maybe because I think the healthcare system and public health hasn't done a great job communicating that as of late. Many huge strides had been done in the early 1900s and early 2000s, etc. But we've come to this impasse lately that communication has deteriorated between the public and healthcare and medicine. And it's interesting because, I mean, do you think, you're talking about Athena and Medusa, going back to that, dynamic that, it's a symbol and symbolic of what's kind of going on in this current state. And so it's really interesting how you kind of tapped into that. But I wanted to also talk about that internalized expectations, internalized misogyny that can come in through some of those symbolisms that you write about. Can you discuss a little bit about those deeper questions about the systems and how does that reflect on women, and how do we end up changing, and how do we change based on those internalizations?
There were a lot of similarities amongst these women's stories, and yet there were also some differences. And it was just like time and time again, women just did not feel heard on a multitude of, whether it was conditions or experiences. And sometimes it was cultural and sometimes it was medicine. I interviewed a woman who's Korean American, and she grew up in a culturally traditional environment where she didn't talk about periods. They didn't talk about sex. And so she suffered with endometriosis for years, and to the point where she had to have a hysterectomy. And now she's coming forward and wanting to talk about it. But that was a cultural, and I feel like even though we're talking about one specific culture, I think it's almost universal, because she said that if there's a defect, you can bring honor or dishonor to your family. So now that you don't have this hysterectomy, there's this connection with bringing honor to your family or dishonor. And I feel like that's probably still the same universally of, I think we don't want to let people down. And whether it's infertility or a miscarriage, or we're seeking out IVF, I think we just feel like we're just some sort of failure. That's the symbols I was seeing, is like women, when they're in a tremendous amount of pain, whether it's physical or emotional, almost default to a shame. There's this shame. And I think it goes back to that misogyny and that patriarchal society that has remained in such control over thousands of years. And I think we're just designed to automatically think it's our fault that we're in pain. And I don't think we're communicating to women that your body is in pain, and it's in pain for a reason. It's in pain because it's signaling to you that something is wrong, and it does deserve to be addressed. But I think because we've didn't really understand periods. I don't know if we truly fully understand periods or perimenopause or menopause. So we just associate with there's going to be discomfort with periods. Well, there is a discomfort to periods, but there should not be a life-altering pain with periods.
Debilitating pain. Yeah.
But we make women suffer because we're like, it's just period pain, and we think that women are just going to have it for a few days and they can go back to their life. And that's not the same for every woman. And I think we're just now finally figuring out all these conditions that affect the woman. But it has taken, how many centuries has it taken us to finally understand PCOS, which is now PMOS? And that's even recent. Endometriosis and thyroid, how much of our thyroid impacts our hormones and our weight gain. So I think we're taught from a young age, we as women, we're taught to be caregivers. We're taught to be selfless. And I think we're just taught to put ourselves last. So when we are raised from childhood into adulthood thinking that we need to put ourselves last. And I see a lot of mothers do that. I do that. It's like, I'm going to do everything for my children and I'm going to put myself last, even though like you're
Yeah.
exhausted and you're in pain. But it's almost like we were programmed from children until now that that's what we're supposed to do. And I think that's part of the silence of, well, if I go take care of my health and I go take care of myself, well, then I can't take care of others. And taking care of others starts with taking care of yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's all about quietly enduring.
Mm-hmm.
You women are taught that you're weak, but yet you're strong enough to quietly endure everything brought upon you. You're the weaker sex, but you're yet strong enough to quietly endure the pain, endure the isolation, endure the, trauma or the, bad marriage, the
Mm-hmm.
domestic abuse, the, whatever may be going on.
And it goes back to
Or,
shame
or the, yeah. And then,
and
or
failure.
even this superhero woman, you're weaker, but yet you have to do all the cooking, the cleaning, the housework, plus get a job and support us sometimes, if you're allowed to. And
Schedule the
then,
pediatrician appointments, the doctors,
yeah,
the eye doctor, the
yeah,
orthodontist, the all of this
everything. The
for it.
mental load is on you. Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, that's a huge narrative and I think, it's coming back even stronger now because, and a lot of I don't know how, but they have really captured the young people in this ideology of marriage, babies, and that's, don't worry about education. Don't worry
Mhm.
about the future. You're under the patriarch of the family and that's all you need, which, I'm married, you're married, we both have children. We did have that, but it doesn't mean that there's more to life, that there's more to our calling, there's more to us as women, there's more to us as individual women, right? It's interesting that they're, continuing that and making it even more suppressive.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm a mother to two daughters, and I'm like, am I raising my children wrong? Because my 11-year-old has no desire to get married and have kids. She wants to be a professional athlete. And I told her that if she doesn't want to get married and have kids, that's fine. I'm not going to love you any less because you're writing your own narrative. But I also find it interesting of, I think, our generation, because I'm looking at the data, because after Roe v. Wade has been reversed and women's health is completely at risk, especially with pregnancy, and a heartbeat of a baby doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a quality of life with that baby. And it's women are dying of sepsis because of these draconian laws. But but they're saying that our birth rates are falling, which means women are having less sex. And so I do feel like, and to some degree, they're saying like, they're telling women how to live. And women are like, okay, fine. I don't need you to fulfill these needs. I can take care. But yeah, the younger generation, when I first started teaching college, I had women who were young, want to go to nursing, wanted to be a teacher, want to be a doctor. And at least once a semester, I will have young women, and granted, I'm in a traditional rural area, who are coming to college, wanting to earn their associate's degree, get married, be a stay-at-home mom, and they're getting the college degree because they plan on homeschooling their kids. They know, and I mean, I'm in education, and education's a lot like medicine. There is a massive distrust between education and the public. The public
That's
struggles
so
to trust
true.
us now
Yeah.
because it's been politicized. But at the
Mhm.
same time, they're okay with educating some women, at least an associate's degree, but they want to educate women with the goal of taking care of children.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Power to the people who want to stay at home, power to people who want to work.
Absolutely.
There's, everyone has their own desire, calling, purpose, but when they force a
Hmm.
certain type of way a woman should be on all women, then you're taking away the unique purpose and calling for each woman. And, not everyone is the same. Not everyone is going to want to do the exact same thing as lady next door, And so that's where I also kind of cannot agree to this way of expectation of, it's only homemaking and homeschooling and only that is the highest calling for a woman. That isn't the only highest calling for a woman,
Healthcare would be if women were actually able to have a seat at the table all these centuries.
Mm.
I think about that often of if we have given equal opportunity to these marginalized groups and to women, how far advanced humankind would be.
Just a simple example, when I was looking at colonialization and how it affected women, just one aspect was studied, in particular, land rights. When the colonization occurred, they enforced more of this patriarchal kind of viewpoint, and they further limited women's rights by saying that a woman cannot own land. They cannot inherit land. In Sri Lanka, I was looking at that aspect of colonialization in particular. And that article they had researched, and, prior to the 1600s when colonizers came in, women were able to inherit land based on different subsects of ethnicities that were tribes or whatever cultures were living there at that time. But inheritance was through an inheritance. A daughter can own land, women can own land. But when the colonizers came, they pushed this patriarchal system because they knew by leaving out the women, they made them forced into more poverty. And forcing them into a more poverty kind of state when, if they don't have a husband, if they don't have a brother, if they don't have any family left, they're left with nothing. And without economic income, they cannot fund themselves. They cannot educate themselves. They cannot do anything else for themselves. They're dependent on somebody else. And thereby that dependence on a man, but that man was also dependent on the colonizer. So it was cutting that link of independence, of growth, of economic sustainability and growth. They were able to have this power over all. And we're seeing that same cycle come in, but we're totally missing it. They're wanting to cut off the growth and trajectory that women can go towards for not just themselves, but their children, their families, society, communities, but when they cut off that link, then certain people can dominate all,
Yeah, it's scary, but I do see some pushback in some of this idea. I do see pushback, which makes me happy. And so I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm like, okay, in order for a better world to happen, maybe like something destroyed needs to happen for something to be rebuilt. And that's how I'm seeing it. Like we can't ignore the misogyny anymore. We can't ignore the racism. I'm almost impressed of how open it is now. Because it didn't used to be this transparent. Well, it's transparent. And now that it's out in the open, I tell myself this is, I maybe I'm just giving myself false hope, but I'm like, everything's out. It's all in the open. Hopefully we only have a couple more years of this chaos, and maybe we can all start, because we do have pockets of where we agree. And I think fathers to daughters, I know my husband has changed his perspective of women by having 2 daughters, and I'm not just going to say we are not raising our daughters to be homemakers and wives. If that is what they want to be, I do want them to go to college, but it goes back to you with that economic stability. I want my daughters to know that if they want a traditional life, at least have a college degree, because life happens. Your husband can get sick.
Yeah.
Your husband can pass away. Your husband can go without a job. And if you at least have a degree or something, you have something to fall back on. Don't be 100% dependent on one person for your household to work. But we tell our girls all the time, like, you're not getting married until you're 30. And even though we jokingly say that, a part of me is like, I'm not joking about that. I want you to go live life. And
we do the same.
I'm like, go live, like go, like travel the world and go study other cultures. And you want to be a professional athlete, give yourself a shot. I mean, we have like a 1% chance, and if it doesn't work, okay, it doesn't work. Go find a new dream.
Exactly. No, I mean, my husband tells my daughter all the time, don't let anyone tell you can't do something, because you can be whatever you want to be with the hard work and desire, passion behind it, but don't let others limit you. And she's only 6, but he tells that to her all the time because we don't want her to be limited by expectations based on race, gender, or ethnicity. If she has the passion, hard work, and desire, let her do it, and that should be for all, right? But I think the fact that we're having this conversation, a girl from Sri Lanka, and I am a Christian, but, my viewpoints are different than others Christians, but, we can all have this conversation. We all can talk. The fact that we're talking about it does show that there is hope, for the future, and that there are others who hope for the same thing as well.
And not just here, across the world. I've been talking to people from Australia and England and Spain and even India. And we're having this conversation. So I do feel this isn't just an American conversation. This has been global. And I think many women across the world are standing up and saying, okay, we need more. We need more respect. We need to be heard. We need to be at the table when it comes to research of our bodies. And yes, it is messy right now. And it does look like there's this loss of hope. I'm Christian as well. And people may not believe that, but that I grew up instilling what would Jesus do. That was always, I remember making all these bracelets. And so the fact that like Mary Magdalene was part of his disciples and him protecting a woman who, according to the law, committed adultery, that really fuels my feminist attitude of how I treat people.
Yeah. And, that's, I know this conversation is going way over time, and I'm so sorry to take up your time, but I mean, this is the thing I have been talking with my husband about. Like, even the word feminism, it's gotten such a negative connotation. And we have this little book, or it's a big book of things about everything. And it has every historical fact and scientific fact for kids to learn. And one whole, page is all about feminism, but it's about this Mexican leader. I forgot her name, but in the early 1400s or so, she developed this non-religious school for girls so that they can have the same educational benefits that the boys were having. And every one of those girls who went to her school ended up having a political say, a say in healthcare, because they were taught to be leaders. They were taught to be voices of change for the next generation. And, it talked about when women had the right to vote. And now we're talking about taking away the right to vote, that we will have less of a voice, less of a say, in change and hope for people, and it's become such a negative connotation when it started with just giving us equal opportunities to what is out there today.
I'm still not there yet. I just started Bell Hook's Communion, and it is about the female search for love. And she talks about the feminist movement and how it both helped and kind of hindered some of the movement. And I do recommend this. I'm about halfway through. And she does talk about this concept of love and women as a whole, of people want power. And is it possible to live in a society with power and love? And who is going to be sacrificing? Because it's almost like in the patriarchal society, it's like almost somebody needs to sacrifice. One needs to be a dominant and the other one is following that other person. So it's just this whole conversation and how the feminist movement was, again, trying to get that equal opportunity. But women were still struggling with love because our concept of love is whatever the patriarchy told us what love is.
Yeah, there's good and bad with everything. There's difficult concepts to deal with and easier things to hold on to. But it's just this equal opportunity is at the end of the day what we don't want to have taken away from us again.
Shouldn't Well, the Southern Baptist Church just voted to remove women from being preachers, and they're weaponizing the Bible to justify that reasoning, which makes no sense to me because in the Bible, women play such an active role in discipleship and preaching. Yeah, we're kind of going backwards, but I do see pushback. I do see that as well, and even here in a rural area, I see women stepping up and saying, no, this isn't right.
Yeah, for sure. And so, gosh, I wish we could go on and on because there's so much.
I have family. in Oklahoma City, and we'll talk about my book because, I mean, my book is like medical humanities and sociology. So like I kind
Mm-hmm.
of pursue a lot of these different
Yeah.
societal issues with women and
Mm-hmm.
using my
Yeah.
own experience and finding women like you who were all fighting for just to have a better society. Like if I can have my ideal
Yeah.
society, we would have universal health care. Healthcare would be a basic human right. We wouldn't have to go through insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, and science and research would
Yeah.
not be politicized, and women would actually be studied. If you want to be a traditional stay-at-home
Mm-hmm.
mom, hats off to you. I respect you. If you want to be a CEO and you're a mother, hats off. I respect you. If you're like, I just don't want to be a mom and I want to have a career, I would respect you. I think that's my ideal world. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm fighting for. Whether I see it in my lifetime or not, I don't know, but I'm
Yeah.
giving it my best effort.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we all hope for. And it's hopeful that we are seeing more conversations and discussions that show that people are, thinking about what's wrong with those ideologies that are kind of coming up and pushing back, as you said, on those things. So, I mean, I hope that everyone reads your book, Don't It Be Athena, which comes out, I think, in
Yes, July 20th. And
July 20th.
yeah, hopefully I can get to Oklahoma City next month and do some book signings and Q&As.
Yeah, that'll be great. That'll be awesome. And we'll look forward to seeing you here in Oklahoma. And, yeah, I think, as you said, I just want to end this with this Christian perspective that, we're all called to a purpose and
Mhm.
God has something unique for each and every one of us. And
Absolutely.
we can't limit ourselves and say our fullest and sacrifice ourselves in pain, thinking that's the only way to be, and that can be emotional pain, physical pain, and trauma. But
Mhm.
we don't need to live under those bondages. We can have freedom. And that's why Christ came, to give us freedom to be able to live fully and freely with that calling and purpose upon our life. And,
Yeah, we need to create a safe space
yeah.
for healing. And that
Hmm.
begins with removing the shame and
Yeah.
invalidating pain, because your body is in pain for a reason and your body is signaling to you it's in pain for a reason. And that type of healing can only happen when we create a safe space and validate that the pain is real.
Yeah. And, Christ, when you think of the Christian thing, the whole thing is, we don't have shame, right? The
Yeah,
whole idea of,
we
and
should be
so,
removing the shame and yeah, and
yeah.
Christianity. That's the whole goal. And that's the part of the Christianity I do like,
Yeah.
is creating a safe
Mhm.
space to remove shame. And I think
Mhm.
just institutionally, we need to do a better job of creating that safe space.
Exactly. And so thank you again for joining us. And thank you all for listening to this conversation with Kayla Branstetter. One of the ideas I'm carrying with me from today is people are not problems to solve, they're stories to listen to. Whether we're talking about healthcare, motherhood, relationships, or the way we move through our communities, there is power in choosing curiosity over assumptions and compassion over performance. This conversation reminds us that strength and suffering were never meant to become synonymous, but perhaps real resilience isn't pretending we're unaffected. It's allowing ourselves and others to remain fully human. If today's episode encouraged you, challenged you, or gave you language to something you've experienced, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you so much for being part of this community where we talk honestly about medicine, motherhood, missions, purpose, and hope. Until next time, may you have the courage to keep asking those good questions, keep extending compassion, and keep sparking hope wherever God has placed you. See you next week. Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. We hope you found inspiration, insight, and a sense of connection in the stories we shared today. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram for updates, free downloads, and join a community of like-minded individuals passionate about making a difference through medicine, motherhood, and mission work. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Until next time, keep sparking hope, keep healing, keep nurturing, and keep making a difference. This is Johanna signing off from Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. The medical opinions expressed on this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. Always consult a licensed healthcare provider for personal medical concerns or questions. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast host.